In my daily trading, it showed the three of us, Amelia with her soft smile, me, still with my dark hair, and little Elijah, maybe about 10 years old, with a disgruntled expression on his face. He was always a serious child, even when other kids his age were carefree playing and fantasizing. "You're too hard on him," Amelia often told me. Maybe she was right. I wanted my son to grow up to be a disciplined, responsible person. Perhaps in the process, I forgot to teach him the joy and ease that make life worth living. When Elijah left to attend university in another state, I felt both pride and relief. Pride in his success and relief that I no longer had to endure the strain of our relationship. He rarely came home, even for holidays, preferring to spend them with friends or working part-time. I respected his independence, though Amelia suffered from his absence. After her death, our bond with our son became even more fragile. Elijah came to the funeral, stood silently by the coffin, and left the next day, citing urgent office business. I didn't blame him. Everyone grieves in their own way. But since then, our communication had been reduced to rare phone calls on holidays and even rarer visits. For the past 5 years, Elijah has lived in Van Buren, a 20-minute drive from my house. He works as a financial analyst for a large company, and he seems to be doing well. We see each other about once every 2 or 3 months, usually over lunch at a restaurant, where we talk about the weather and the news, avoiding any personal topics. So when the mailman brought a cream-colored, gold-embossed envelope this morning, I was surprised. Inside was a wedding invitation. Elijah is getting married. My son, who had always seemed so independent and self-sufficient, had decided to commit his life to another man, Vanessa Preston. I repeated that name out loud several times, trying to remember our encounters. There hadn't been that many. The first time I'd seen her was about a year ago, when Elijah had unexpectedly brought her over for Christmas dinner. A tall woman with cold blue eyes and platinum hair, she looked more like a model from a glossy magazine than a regular girl. "Dad, this is Vanessa," Elijah introduced her, and I saw something new in his eyes, a mixture of pride and worry, like he was waiting for my approval and simultaneously afraid of not getting it. Vanessa smiled at me with a rehearsed smile that didn't affect her eyes. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Mr. Abbott. Elijah has told me so much about you." At that moment, I sensed something wrong. My son could hardly have told so much about me, given our infrequent and superficial contact. But I nodded and shook her cool hand with its flawless manicure. All evening, Vanessa had been impeccably polite, asking the right questions about my health and former business, admiring the antique furniture in the living room. But behind that mask of perfect conversationalist, I sensed calculation and evaluation. Her gaze slid around the room as if assessing the value of each item. When it came to my store, she perked up. "Elijah said you had a very successful business. You must have made a good profit when you sold it?" My son tensed, and I realized that the matter had already been discussed between them. "Enough for a peaceful old age," I answered evasively. In fact, the sale of the store had brought in a considerable sum, which I had invested wisely, but I had never seen the point in showing off my financial situation. We saw each other a few more times after that evening, at Elijah's birthday party, at Thanksgiving. Each time, Vanessa was flawless in her role as my son's loving friend, but I couldn't shake the feeling of falseness. Maybe it was the little things, the way she looked at her watch when she thought no one could see, or the way her tone changed when she spoke to waiters or cab drivers. Once I overheard her talking on the phone, thinking she was alone on the terrace. "No, everything is going according to plan. The old man doesn't suspect anything. Just needs a little more time." I quietly withdrew, not wanting to be caught eavesdropping. But those words stuck in my mind like a splinter. Who was she calling? What was the plan she was talking about? And why did she call me old man? That night, I tried to gently ask Elijah about Vanessa, what she did for a living, how they'd met. My son reluctantly told me that she works as a lawyer in corporate law. They met at a charity event. "She's smart, driven, and understands me," he said with challenge in his voice, as if expecting me to object. I didn't. Who am I to judge my son's choices? After all, our relationship had long ago teetered on the edge of polite estrangement. If Vanessa makes him happy, well, maybe I'm wrong in my suspicions. But now, looking at the elegant wedding invitation, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. The wedding was set for July 15th, less than a month from now. The venue is the Belvedere Country Club, one of the most expensive and prestigious in our region. I wonder who's paying for all this splendor. Elijah makes good money, but hardly enough for such luxury. And Vanessa's parents, as far as I remembered from rare references, were middle-income people. Her father worked as an engineer, her mother taught music. I put the invitation aside and walked to the window. Beyond it was my old garden, which I still kept in order, though it was getting harder every year. Amelia loved that garden. She could spend hours fiddling with the roses and clematis, creating living pictures of flowers and leaves. "What would you advise me, dear?" I whispered, looking at a bush of her favorite white roses. Amelia always had a knack for seeing the best in people. She would surely have found a way to befriend Vanessa, to melt her coldness with her warmth. But Amelia's gone, and I have to deal with all this on my own. I could just send a polite refusal, citing health or other circumstances. Elijah would probably even be glad I was gone. But something told me I should be there. Perhaps it was because of this vague uneasiness that hadn't let go of me since I'd met Vanessa. It's decided. I'm going to that wedding. If my fears are unfounded, I'll be glad to be wrong. And if not, well, at least I'll be there to support my son when needed. I returned to the table and picked up a pen to fill out the reply card that came with the invitation. "I gratefully accept your invitation." I wrote in my old-fashioned curlicue handwriting that I had learned in school when calligraphy was a compulsory subject. For a second, I had a moment of doubt. Maybe I was just becoming a grouchy old man, suspicious of everyone and everything. Maybe Vanessa really loves my son, and I just can't or don't want to see it. But then I remembered her cold, appraising gaze gliding through my house, and I decided to trust my intuition. In my 70-plus years of life, I'd learned to recognize insincerity, and something told me that my son's wedding would not be as joyous an occasion as it should be. I sealed the reply envelope and placed it on the hallway table to mail tomorrow morning. No matter what happened, I would be there. Not as a pesky parent meddling in my adult son's life, but as a witness and, if need be, as a last line of defense. With that thought in mind, I set out to make dinner, a simple pasta and sauce from Amelia's recipe. Tomorrow I'll call my tailor to update my suit for the ceremony. In the meantime, I would watch and wait, hoping my hunch was deceiving me. But something told me something unexpected would happen at this wedding, and I had to prepare for that too. July was unusually hot. I could feel the humid air pressing on my shoulders as I walked from the parking lot to the Laurel Leaf restaurant, where the rehearsal dinner was to be held. My old tweed jacket, despite the lightweight fabric, seemed heavy and out of place in this weather. But I couldn't afford to look sloppy, not at an event of such importance to my son. The last few weeks flew by in a flurry of activity I hadn't anticipated. After I'd sent my positive response to the invitation, Elijah called me out of the blue, for the first time in months on his own initiative. "Dad," his voice sounded strained, "I'm glad you're coming. Vanessa is too. We have some details to discuss." Those details turned out to be a whole list of requirements: what color my suit should be, what time I should arrive, and, what surprised me most, a strong recommendation that I not bring any gifts. "Just your presence will be gift enough," Elijah said in a tone that sounded like he was repeating someone else's words. I agreed to everything, not wanting to cause trouble. Though the lack of a gift seemed odd, I had intended to give them a check for a substantial sum so that the young family could begin their life together without financial worries. Now this check was lying in my safe at home, waiting for the right moment. The restaurant was a pretentious place, with dusky lighting and waiters in white gloves. At the entrance was an elegant chalkboard that read, "Preston Abbott Rehearsal Dinner, Private Party." I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The banquet hall was already filled with people, mostly young people around the same age as Elijah and Vanessa, laughing loudly and exchanging jokes. In the far corner, I noticed an older couple who looked as out of place as myself, probably Vanessa's parents. "Dad, you came." Elijah appeared beside me, dressed in an immaculate dark blue suit. He looked both tense and excited at the same time. "Let me introduce you to Vanessa's family." The next half hour passed in awkward introductions. Vanessa's parents, Robert and Helen Preston, appeared to be pleasant, modest people, clearly feeling out of place amidst the opulence that surrounded their daughter's wedding. Robert, a retired engineer, quietly shared with me his bewilderment at the choice of venue. We had suggested having the ceremony at our local church and the reception at the community center. It would have been more modest, but more heartfelt. But Vanessa insisted on doing it her way. He shook his head. Young people these days are so... I nodded sympathetically, but didn't pursue the subject. Instead, we talked about his former job and my antique store, finding unexpected common interests in restoring old machinery. Finally, Vanessa herself appeared, spectacular in a tight-fitting, champagne-colored dress. She held herself like the hostess of the reception, confidently directing the guests and staff, telling them where to sit. Cornelius, how nice of you to be able to join us. She approached me with a wide smile that didn't reach her eyes. Elijah was so worried if you were coming. I wouldn't have missed my only son's wedding, I replied, trying to sound sincere. Vanessa tilted her head slightly. Of course you would. Family is so important. By the way, we seated you next to my parents. Thought you'd be more comfortable with people of your generation. I felt a slight prick, a deliberate reminder of my age, but only smiled and nodded. Thank you for your concern. Dinner passed tensely. Elijah and Vanessa sat at the head of a long table, surrounded by their friends and bridesmaids. Vanessa's parents and I were at the very back, almost isolated from the main fun. The food was exquisite, but the portions so small that I caught myself thinking about the sandwich that was waiting for me at home in the fridge. So Cornelius, Helen Preston leaned across the table to me. Vanessa tells me you used to own an antique store? It must be so fascinating to work with historical items. Yes, it was my wife and I's passion. We started out with a small shop and ended up with a serious business with clients all over the world. Oh, you must have made good money selling it, one of the bridesmaids sitting next to us interjected. Antiques are at a premium right now. I smiled demurely. Enough for a quiet life. Dad's always been frugal, said Elijah suddenly, who appeared to be listening to our conversation. I sure why, in fact, he's just frugal. Lives in a big house, but saves on everything from food to clothes. There was an awkward silence. I felt myself blush with humiliation, but held back. Everyone has a different attitude toward money, son. Of course, Vanessa interjected with unnatural cheerfulness. Although I've always believed that life should be lived now, not put off for later, especially at your age, Cornelius. There was that hint of my age again. I began to realize that it was a tactic to constantly emphasize my old age and supposed uselessness. At my age, one gains wisdom that is often lacking in the young, I replied calmly. Several guests laughed, and I saw Vanessa's cheeks redden slightly. After dessert, a tiny slice of cake barely visible on the large plate, the toast began. Elijah and Vanessa's friends made trite speeches about love and eternity, punctuated by bursts of misplaced laughter. Vanessa's parents said some warm, sincere words. When it was my turn, I stood up, feeling the stares of everyone present. I'm not a public speaker, I began, but I know what true love is. Amelia, Elijah's mother, and I have been together for almost half a century. I wish you the same happiness we have known. I raised my glass. To Elijah and Vanessa. The toast was met with polite applause, but I noticed Vanessa whisper something in the ear of one of her girlfriends, and she barely contained a laugh. Elijah looked embarrassed but nodded gratefully at me. After the toast, we began discussing the final details of the ceremony. The wedding planner, an energetic woman with a clipboard, was giving instructions to each of the participants who should stand where, when to enter, what to say. She didn't even approach me. When I asked Elijah about my role, he shifted awkwardly from foot to foot. Actually, Dad, we decided to stray a bit from tradition. Vanessa has asked her father to walk her down the aisle, but then he's just going to sit in the front row. We didn't plan on special roles for the other parents. I felt something clench inside me, but nodded understandingly. Of course, it's your day. It's up to you. Soon I felt the need to get out for some fresh air. The stuffiness in the hall, the tension, and the slight resentment from my son's words all made me dizzy. I excused myself and went out into the restaurant garden, where I could sit quietly on a bench under an old oak tree. The warm evening air brought some relief. I inhaled deeply, trying to gather my thoughts. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I'm just jealous of my son's happiness, his new life that will begin without me. My musings were interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the gravel path. I instinctively retreated into the shade of a tree, not wanting any conversation right now. To my surprise, it was Vanessa, walking quickly toward the gazebo at the far end of the garden. She was holding a phone to her ear and speaking in a quiet but strained voice. I hadn't intended to eavesdrop, but the wind brought me scraps of her conversation, and what I heard made me freeze. No, you can't come to the wedding, Morton, I've explained. It's too risky. Yes, I know I promised. Look, everything's going according to plan. Just a little more, and we'll get what we want. She paused, apparently listening to her interlocutor's reply. No, the old man still has no idea about anything. He thinks I'm in love with his precious little son. Yes, I know you're jealous, but it's just business, honey. Once we're married, I have access to the family assets. No, trust me, he's got a lot more money than he looks. I checked, he sold his store for millions and has lived like a cheapskate all these years, spending almost nothing. My heart beat faster. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Vanessa was talking about me, about my money, and she was clearly planning some kind of scam with this Morton, whoever he was. Of course, Elijah doesn't suspect a thing. He's so naive, thinks I'm going crazy with his corporate stories and future plans. In reality, I fall asleep out of boredom every time he opens his mouth. She laughed, and that laugh sounded so cold it sent shivers running down my spine. Don't worry, we'll be together soon. Once I get my share of the inheritance, and I know how to get Elijah to sign everything over to me, we can finally live the life we've always dreamed of. Yes, honey, I miss you too. But this will all be over soon, I promise. I'd heard enough. Quietly, trying not to give away my presence, I retreated back towards the restaurant building. Inside, I found a secluded spot in the hallway and leaned against the wall, feeling my heart pounding. All my suspicions were right. Vanessa didn't love my son. She was after my money that even Elijah didn't know existed. And she had a lover, this Morton, with whom she planned to share the spoils. I felt a surge of anger turn to deep anxiety. What should I do with this information? Tell Elijah. But would he believe me? We'd grown so far apart over the years that any word I said against Vanessa would be seen as an attempt to destroy his happiness. Besides, I had no proof, just an overheard conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. Vanessa could easily deny it and make me look like a senile old man jealous of a young couple. I returned to the banquet hall just in time to hear the wedding planner announce the end of the rehearsal. The guests began to disperse, exchanging jokes and plans for tomorrow, the last day before the wedding. Elijah approached me with a slight smile. Dad, is everything okay? You disappeared somewhere. Just stepped out for some fresh air, I replied, trying to look calm. Vanessa was worried about you. She thought maybe you'd gotten sick. I barely held back a bitter chuckle. I understood her worry now. She was just checking to see if I'd overheard her conversation. There's nothing wrong with me. Just tired a little. Age, you know. Elijah nodded in relief. Good. Listen, Dad. Thanks for coming over today. I know we haven't always get along, but it means a lot to me that you're here. I saw a sincerity in his eyes that I hadn't noticed in years. My son, despite our estrangement, still needed my approval. And now he was about to commit his life to a woman who saw him only as a means to her own selfish ends. Elijah, I began hesitantly, are you sure that Vanessa, that she's really the one for you? His face changed immediately, becoming tense and closed off. What do you mean? It's just, you haven't known each other that long. Marriage is a serious step. Sometimes it pays to make sure the person next to you really loves you and not what? His voice turned cold. Talk to me, Dad. I could see he was already defensive, ready to dismiss any criticism of his fiancée. And I realized that talking directly now would only push him further away. It's nothing, son, just a fatherly concern. Vanessa seems like a very determined girl. She is, Elijah said proudly. She knows what she wants out of life. That's one of the reasons why I love her. Yeah, I've noticed, I muttered. Vanessa appeared beside us, seemingly materializing out of thin air. What are you two having such a serious conversation about? She asked with a smile, putting her arm around Elijah's waist. Dad's giving me fatherly advice about marriage, Elijah said with a nervous chuckle. How sweet, Vanessa purred, looking at me with challenge. You must have a wealth of experience, Cornelius. though times have changed a lot since you were a young groom. Some things don't change, I replied, looking her straight in the eye. Oh, like the importance of honesty in a relationship, for example. For a moment, I saw something resembling alarm in her gaze, but she quickly regained her composure. I absolutely agree. Honesty is the foundation of everything. Right, sweetie? She turned to Elijah, who nodded, not noticing the tension between us. We should get going, Vanessa said. I have so much more to do before beauty day tomorrow. I'll see you at the wedding, Cornelius. She tugged Elijah's arm, leading him away. My son cast an apologetic glance at me over his shoulder and waved goodbye. I was left alone in the nearly empty banquet hall with a heavy weight of knowledge I couldn't use. I was certain now that Vanessa was a fraud, targeting my money through my son, but how to warn Elijah without permanently destroying our fragile bond? As I walked to my car across the dark parking lot, I was haunted by an agonizing doubt. Should I tell my son the truth, risking rejection, or keep silent, allowing him to make perhaps the biggest mistake of his life? With a heavy heart, I started the engine. The wedding was less than 2 days away. The time to make a decision was slipping away like sand through my fingers. The morning of the wedding day was surprisingly clear and cool after a week of unbearable heat. I woke up before dawn, exhausted from sleeplessness and heavy thoughts. For the past 24 hours, I tossed and turned between the decision to tell Elijah the truth and the fear that he would see my words as an attempt to interfere with his life. I called him twice, but both times went to voicemail. The second time I left a message. Son, I need to talk to you before the ceremony. It's important. There was no reply. My dark gray suit, newly ironed, was waiting on the coat rack. I shaved especially carefully, trying not to cut myself with trembling hands. At the last moment, I decided to take the prepared check with me, not for handing it over against the wishes of the young people, but as a kind of talisman, a reminder of my true feelings for my son. The country club Belvedere was half an hour's drive from the city among picturesque hills. The driveway was decorated with white ribbons and flowers, and at the entrance, young men in strict suits greeted guests, checking invitations. I tried to find Elijah, but one of the organizers informed me that the bride and groom were in separate rooms and were not accepting visitors. Not even family? I asked with a nudge. The young man only shrugged. Those are the instructions. Sighing, I headed toward the terrace where guests were already gathering. I noticed Vanessa's parents standing apart from the main crowd. Helen looked tense in a strict navy blue dress, and Robert was awkwardly adjusting his tie. Cornelius, Helen smiled warmly at me. It's good to have you here. Robert and I feel lost amidst all this luxury. Robert hummed quietly. Vanessa was always striving for the best. But this, he circled his hand around, seems excessive. I still don't see how they can afford it. That question plagued me too. Elijah made good money, but not enough to pay for a wedding like this. And the Preston family was clearly middle income. Had Vanessa already started spending the money she'd hoped to get through my son? At 11 o'clock, string music played, signaling the start of the ceremony. I was escorted to the front row. On the right side of the aisle, a seat for the groom's family. On the left side sat the Prestons, embarrassed by this position of honor. When Elijah appeared in an immaculate black tuxedo, my heart clenched. My son looked happy and nervous at the same time, his face glowing with hope. Our gazes met for a second, and he gave me a slight nod. Vanessa appeared with her father at her side. I had to hand it to her. She looked stunning. Her dress flowed around her like liquid silver. She moved with grace and smiled like she was reliving the happiest day of her life. Looking at her, I almost doubted my suspicions. But then I remembered her conversation with Morton, her cold laugh at the mention of Elijah's naivete, and my doubts vanished. The ceremony was short and touching. When the rings were exchanged, Vanessa looked at me for a moment, and I saw something akin to triumph in her eyes. After the ceremony, the guests were invited to the main hall for a celebratory dinner. I was seated at the head table, but at a considerable distance from the newlyweds, between a distant relative of Vanessa's and her colleague from the law firm. During the meal, I watched Vanessa charm the guests with her smile and attention. Elijah followed her, looking a little lost in that glitz. Every now and then, she took him under her arm with a possessive gesture, showing off her acquisition. They were the last to arrive at my table. Vanessa looked annoyed, as if performing an unpleasant duty. Cornelius, I hope you're enjoying the festivities, she asked with a fake smile. Everything is beautifully organized, I replied neutrally. Very impressive. Yes, we wanted this day to be special, Elijah said, looking at his wife with adoration. Vanessa thought of every detail. And it was well worth the considerable effort and expense, she added meaningfully. You've done splendidly. Elijah, may I speak with you privately, just for a minute? Vanessa answered for him. I'm afraid now is not a good time. We have many more guests to greet, and soon the toasts and dancing will begin. They left and I remained in the company of strangers, politely keeping up the conversation, but mentally making a plan of action. After the toast, the dancing began. I took advantage of the moment and approached my son as Vanessa danced with his father. Elijah, we need to talk. This is about Vanessa. There are things you need to know. What things, Dad? Today is my wedding day. I'd rather not hear any criticism. It's not about criticism. I overheard a conversation. She's not who she says she is. Elijah shook his head. Just don't get me started. I know you've never approved of my choices. Vanessa returned, brightening her smile. What are you two having such a serious conversation about? Nothing in particular, Elijah said quickly. Dad's just congratulating us. After the cake, the celebration became less formal. I tried to talk to my son again while Vanessa took pictures with her girlfriends. Son, I have something important to tell you. It can't wait. Dad, please, don't ruin this day. I don't want to ruin your day. I want to protect you. Vanessa, she has a lover. His name is Morton. I heard her talking to him, saying you don't suspect anything. That's enough. I don't want to hear it. But it's true, she plans to gain access to my money through you. To your money? Elijah grinned. What money, Dad? You've lived like a cheapskate all your life. And now you say you have money and Vanessa somehow found out about it? Vanessa walked over. Is everything okay? Absolutely, she said, noticing our tension. We're just having a conversation with your father. I decided to go out on the terrace to gather my thoughts. It wasn't long before Vanessa came out there. Enjoying the view, Cornelius? The view is beautiful, I replied neutrally. You know, I was hoping we could get along, for Elijah's sake, but you've decided to complicate things. I want to protect my son. From what? From the woman who loves him? We both know that's not true, I said. I heard your conversation with Morton. Her face froze for a moment, then she laughed. And you told Elijah about it? Tried to, but he didn't want to listen. Of course he didn't want to. Why should he believe a father who kept him at a distance? A father who lied about his financial situation? The guests came out of the hall, Elijah among them. Is everything okay? He asked worriedly. Absolutely, Vanessa said with a smile. We're just having a conversation. Elijah looked unsure. Really, Dad? I opened my mouth, but Vanessa was ahead of me. Your father thinks our wedding is a waste of money, and that I'm not good enough for you. Is that true? His face expressed shock. No, I never said such a thing. Vanessa, why are you lying? He also said he wouldn't give us a dime of his millions. All these years he's been pretending to be poor. Stop it, yelled Elijah to me. Why can't you just be happy for me? Why do you have to ruin everything? Other guests began to approach us. Son, please listen to me, I pleaded. Vanessa is manipulating you. She has Morton. She's using you for my money. Vanessa laughed, turning to the crowd. Did you hear that? The old man is out of his mind. Thinks I married his son for non-existent money. Dad, Elijah said quietly, you'd better leave. Elijah, please. No, I asked you not to ruin this day. Vanessa suddenly stepped forward, her face contorted. You, she pointed at me. Ha ha ha, this old man didn't put a single dollar into the wedding, but has the nerve to criticize. Get out! Her shout echoed across the terrace. Elijah stood with his head down. Vanessa continued. You never supported your son. You've never been a real father. Get out of here now. Several men took a step in my direction. My son kept his eyes down, acquiescing. Okay, I'm leaving. I nodded. I love you, son. I hope you understand what I was trying to do. I made my way through the crowd toward the exit. The party was resuming. Music was playing. Waiters were serving drinks. Vanessa was talking excitedly to the guests. Elijah stood next to me with a lifeless face. With a heavy heart, I walked out to the parking lot and got into the car. I didn't hurry to start the engine. What was my hurry? Home, where no one was waiting. I pondered what I had done wrong. My thoughts were interrupted by the phone ringing. An unfamiliar number. I answered it. Cornelius Abbott. The male voice sounded unsure. You don't know me. My name is Morton Kane. Yeah, a friend of Vanessa's. I need to talk to you. She's getting married today, and I just found out about it. I think you should know the truth. Morton Kane? The Morton? I felt my heart beat faster. Perhaps this was Elijah's chance to prove the truth. Yes, there was a mixture of hurt and anger in his voice. I quickly considered the situation. There's a cafe called the Lavender Hill Cafe about 2 miles from the club if you take the main road. I'll meet you there in 15 minutes. Okay, he cut off. I started the engine and drove out of the parking lot, feeling a strange mixture of emotions. Relief that my suspicions had been confirmed, and anxiety at what now lay ahead. The cafe was half empty, just a couple of elderly customers and a young man nervously drumming his fingers on the table. He looked up as I entered and immediately stood up. Mr. Abbott? Morton Kane appeared to be a tall, attractive man in his 30s, with short dark hair and expressive brown eyes. He was dressed casually but tastefully, jeans and a light-colored jacket, obviously going to an informal meeting rather than a wedding. Cornelius, I corrected him, shaking his outstretched hand. We sat down at a table, and I got right to the point. Tell me about Vanessa. Morton took a deep breath. We've been together for 2 years. At least that's what I thought. We met at a lawyer's conference. I'm a lawyer too. She's always been ambitious, but lately, she started talking about big money, how our lives were about to change. I didn't pay much attention to it. I thought she was just dreaming of career advancement. When was the last time you talked to her? I asked, remembering the overheard phone conversation. 3 days ago. Said she was leaving on firm business, would be unavailable. I thought that was odd. She's usually always on the phone. I started to worry and decided to surprise her by finding out where she was staying. And lo and behold, he waved his hands. The wedding. I can't believe she's been seeing your son all this time, and didn't even bother to break up with me before she married him. I watched him carefully, trying to determine if he was part of some elaborate game, but his hurt seemed genuine, his eyes full of bewilderment and anger. Did she say anything to you about my son? Or about me? Morton thought for a moment. About you, yes. She made a little inquiry about you when she learned that you had sold your business for a considerable sum. Said you were hiding your fortune from your son, but about your son himself, almost nothing. Mentioned that he was seeing some financier, but I thought it was just a business relationship. That confirmed my worst fears. So what are you going to do now? I want the truth, Morton said firmly. I want to look her in the eye and hear an explanation. I wasted 2 years of my life on this woman, thought we were in a serious relationship, and all this time she's been... He didn't finish the sentence, clenching his fists. I made a decision. Come with... She's always been a good actress, Morton grinned bitterly. But I never thought she was capable of this level of manipulation. It's almost admirable in its cruelty. When we pulled up to the Belvedere, there were still many cars in the parking lot. Music was coming from the open windows of the main hall. The reception was in full swing. Ready? I asked Morton, turning off the engine. He straightened up, adjusted his jacket, and nodded. Ready? We entered the club without a problem. The security guards apparently remembered me as a guest and just didn't pay attention to Morton. In the main room, musicians were playing a slow tune, and several couples were twirling in a dance. Vanessa and Elijah were among them. She was whispering something in his ear, and he was smiling, though his smile looked strained. Morton froze when he saw them. It's her, he said quietly, but I heard so much pain in his voice that I couldn't doubt the sincerity of his feelings. We walked slowly through the hall, bypassing the dancing couples. A few of the guests looked at us curiously. They remembered me as the father of the groom who had made a scene and been banished by the bride. And Morton was a stranger, clearly not invited to the gala. As we approached the newlyweds, the music was just ending. Vanessa was the first to notice us and froze, her face suddenly pale. Morton? She uttered almost breathlessly. Elijah, still holding her waist, turned around and saw me. Dad? I told you to leave. Why did you come back? But before I could answer, Morton stepped forward. Vanessa, I wanted to surprise you. and it looks like the surprise was mutual. Vanessa quickly pulled herself together, her expression changing from shock to annoyed. "What are you doing here, Morton? And why are you with him?" She nodded in my direction. "Who's that?" Elijah asked, shifting his gaze from Vanessa to Morton and back again. A small crowd of curious guests began to gather around us. I spotted Vanessa's parents among them, their faces expressing concern. "This is Morton Kane," I introduced him. "Shinar, Vanessa's friend, a very close friend." "What nonsense!" Vanessa tried to laugh, but the laugh came out nervous. "Morton is a co-worker of mine. We work together sometimes, that's all." Morton shook his head. 2 years, Vanessa. 2 years we've been together. I introduced you to my parents. We talked about the future, about children. Meanwhile, you were getting ready to marry someone else. Without even bothering to tell me it was over between us?" Elijah backed away from Vanessa, his face expressing confusion. "What is he talking about? Do you know this man?" Vanessa went on the offensive. "Of course I know him. I already told you. We're co-workers. But he had certain feelings for me that I didn't share. I turned him down several times, but he wouldn't put up with it." She turned to Morton with feigned sympathy. "Morton, I'm sorry, but I never gave you any reason to think there was anything between us. You made that relationship up." Morton looked like he'd been punched. "Made it up? Are your things in my apartment made up too? The pictures of us together? The trip to Europe last summer?" "What trip?" Elijah turned to Vanessa. "You said you were on a business trip to Boston." "He's lying." Vanessa raised her voice, no longer addressing not only Elijah, but everyone gathered. "They're both lying. That man is obsessed with me, and your father is just trying to ruin our wedding. They're conspiring." Morton pulled out his cell phone. "Do you want to see pictures of us together, Elijah? Or read our texts? I have them saved." Vanessa suddenly lunged toward Morton, trying to snatch the phone, but he backed away, keeping the device out of her reach. "Give me that. There's confidential information on there." "Confidential to whom?" Morton asked calmly. "To your husband, who doesn't even know you've been with someone else all this time?" There was silence in the hall. All eyes were fixed on the scene. Elijah stood pale, his gaze darting between Vanessa and Morton. "Show me," he finally said, reaching out for Morton's phone. The man hesitated, then handed him the device, already open on the gallery of photos. Elijah began flipping through them, and with each new image his face grew more somber. There were dozens of pictures of Vanessa and Morton together, smiling, hugging, with the Eiffel Tower in the background, on the beach, in restaurants. "Those pictures can be faked," Vanessa tried to object, but her voice sounded less confident. Elijah continued leafing through, then suddenly stopped at one of the pictures. "This is your necklace, the one I gave you for your birthday 4 months ago. You said it was the first time you'd ever been given something so expensive." Vanessa froze, not knowing what to say in response. Then Morton, frowning, held out his hand. "Show me." He glanced at the photo and nodded. "Yes, that's the necklace I gave her for Christmas. Spent almost all of my savings." My heart clenched at the look on Elijah's face. He looked like he'd been kicked in the butt. "You wore a gift from him when you were with me," he said quietly, "and said it was from me. This isn't just an affair on the side, Vanessa. This is some kind of twisted game." Vanessa, seeing her deception exposed, changed tactics. Her eyes filled with tears. "Elijah, yes, I made a mistake. I should have broken up with Morton sooner. But I really do love you. He was just a past that I couldn't completely let go of. But now that we're married, I swear things will be different." "Married?" Morton looked shocked. "You've already had the ceremony?" "Yes," I replied. "Less than 4 hours ago." Morton turned to Vanessa. "All this time, you've been planning your wedding to another man, still telling me you love me, that we're going to be together?" "It's hard to explain." Vanessa tried to take Elijah's hand, but he pulled back. "No, it's actually very simple," I interjected. "Vanessa wanted access to my money through my son. I happened to overhear her talking to you, Morton, during the rehearsal dinner. She was saying that you would soon get what you wanted." "I never talked about money," Vanessa exclaimed. "Yes, you did," objected Morton. "You've often mentioned that we'd soon have the funds for your dream house. I thought you meant a promotion at work or a case won." He turned to Elijah. "I'm sorry about that. I didn't know about you. If I had, I would have warned you." Elijah stood looking at Vanessa as if seeing her for the first time. Was it all a lie? From the beginning? You dated me, planned the wedding, told me you loved me, and all this time you had another man? And you were with him literally a week before we got married? No, I mean, yes, but not in the way you think. Vanessa looked cornered. I was really going to break up with him. I chose you, isn't that what matters? Chose me or my father's money? Elijah asked quietly. Vanessa fell silent, unable to find an answer. At that moment, Vanessa's father, Robert Preston, stepped forward. Vanessa, what is going on? Is this man telling the truth? He pointed at Morton. She did not answer, and that silence was more eloquent than any words. Helen Preston pressed her hand to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. I apologize to everyone here, Elijah said loudly, addressing the guests. But it appears that tonight's festivities is canceled. His voice shook on the last word. A whisper swept through the hall. Some of the guests looked on with sympathy, others with ill-concealed curiosity. The musicians fell awkwardly silent, not knowing whether to continue playing. Vanessa suddenly rushed to Elijah. No, you can't do this. We just got married. You can't just cancel everything because of some misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? Elijah pulled her hands away. You call it a misunderstanding? You cheated on both of us. Used us. He turned to me. Dad, did you know about this? Until today? I shook my head. I suspected something was wrong. Only heard her talking yesterday. Tried to tell you, but I wouldn't listen, Elijah finished. His eyes read a mixture of hurt and anger. Because I was used to not trusting you. Used to thinking you were meddling in my life. Elijah, please. Vanessa tried to move closer to him again. Let's talk in private. I'll explain everything. But Elijah only shook his head. No, Vanessa. No more explanations. No more lies. He took off his wedding ring and placed it on the nearest table. I'll talk to the lawyers about getting an annulment. Hopefully we can do it quickly and quietly. But right now I want you to leave. Vanessa went pale. What? You can't just kick me out of my own wedding. Not a wedding anymore, Elijah said firmly. And given the circumstances, I don't think anyone would mind. He was right. The guests began to disperse, some throwing judgmental glances at Vanessa. Her parents stood aside, looking confused and ashamed. This is all because of you. Vanessa suddenly turned to me, her face contorted with anger. You set this whole thing up. You and your accomplice. She pointed at Morton, who only shook his head sadly. No one set anything up, Vanessa, I said calmly. You created this situation yourself with your own lies. She looked like she was about to lash out at me, but held back at the last moment. Instead, she grabbed her purse off the table and, without another word, walked quickly toward the exit. Her parents, after a moment's hesitation, followed her. For the next hour, the hall was nearly empty. The guests dispersed in groups, talking quietly among themselves. The wedding organizers looked stunned, unsure what to do with the unfinished food, unfinished champagne, and untouched gifts. Morton left as well, apologizing briefly to Elijah. I'm sorry for the way things turned out. I think we both deserve better. They shook hands, a strange gesture of solidarity between two men deceived by the same woman. When almost everyone had left, Elijah and I were alone in the large empty hall. He sat down at one of the tables, absent-mindedly twirling a champagne glass in his hands. Son? I approached him cautiously. I'm so sorry. Elijah looked up at me. You knew. You tried to warn me and I didn't listen. I sat down next to him. I only suspected. And yes, I tried to tell you, but I chose the wrong moment. No, he shook his head. It's not about the moment. It's about the fact that we've grown too distant from each other. I've stopped trusting your judgment, stopped listening to you at all. We're both to blame for that, I said softly. After your mom died, I withdrew into myself. Didn't know how to be a father without her. She was always the bridge between us. Elijah nodded. You know what the stupidest part is? Part of me always suspected there was something wrong with Vanessa. She was too perfectly attuned to my desires, too interested in my family, in your finances. Why didn't you listen to those doubts? Because, he hesitated, because she made me feel important, special. After so many years of loneliness, it was intoxicating. He took a sip of champagne and grumbled. And I also wanted to prove to you that I could make my own decisions. That I don't need your approval. I nodded understandingly. I know the feeling. My own father was just as controlling as I was. I, too, was always trying to prove to him that I knew what I was doing. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Then Elijah suddenly asked, "Is it true what she said about your money?" I sighed. Yes, the sale of the store brought in a substantial amount, which I successfully invested. I live modestly not from poverty, but out of habit. Perhaps out of fear. Fear of what? That people will only appreciate me for my money, that you'll grow up spoiled, of losing control. I smiled sadly. Looks like I ended up losing something more important, your trust. Elijah looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. A mixture of resentment, understanding, and something else. Perhaps the beginnings of forgiveness. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He asked. At first I wanted you to value labor over money. Then when you got older, I thought it was too late to change our relationship. And when your mother died, I just didn't know how to talk about it. I shook my head. That's no excuse. I should have been more honest with you. Elijah set his glass on the table. What are we going to do now? The guests have dispersed. The wedding is ruined. My wife has turned out to be a liar and a cheat. Right now, I looked at my watch. Right now, we're going home. You can stay at my place if you want, and tomorrow we'll start dealing with all of this. Elijah nodded, suddenly looking very tired. I'm still mad at you, Dad, for knowing and not telling me sooner, for hiding the truth about the money for years, for keeping me at a distance. I know, I replied, and you're entitled to that anger. Elijah stood up. Let's go home. I want this day to be over soon. We walked silently out of the empty hall, leaving behind shattered dreams and the beginning of perhaps a new understanding between us. The week after the failed wedding passed in a strange daze. Elijah spent only one night at my house, occupying the same room he had as a child, with faded posters of rock bands on the walls and shelves full of physics and math books. In the morning, he packed up the few belongings he had, thanked me for the shelter, and left, saying he needed space and time to process what had happened. I didn't insist. I understood all too well the need for solitude after betrayal. Long ago, before Elijah was born, Amelia had almost left me for another man. We'd gotten through that crisis, but I still remembered the heartbreak and confusion. And I didn't even have to endure the public humiliation my son had suffered. I tried to contact him for the first few days. First calling, then texting. The responses were short, formal. I'm fine. Working with a lawyer on an annulment. Talk to you later. Eventually, I decided to give him as much space as he needed and just wait. Life was back to normal. Breakfast, a walk, reading, a simple dinner, falling asleep early to the sound of the old radio. But something was different. For the first time in years, I began to notice how empty my house was, how quiet the evenings were without a human voice other than my own. Maybe the surge of emotion during the wedding had awakened something in me that had long been asleep, lulled to sleep by routine. Robert Preston, Vanessa's father, called me on the fourth day after the scandal. His voice sounded tired and ashamed. Cornelius, I must apologize for my daughter's behavior. Helen and we had no idea she was capable of such behavior. You are not to blame for her actions, Robert, I replied sincerely. Perhaps, but we raised her. Somewhere we made a mistake if she grew up to be a person capable of manipulating others like that. He sighed. How's your son doing? Doing okay, as well as he can. Tell him our apologies. Helen asked me to tell him that any wedding expenses incurred by his side, we are willing to reimburse. I assured him that I would pass on the message, even though I knew that Elijah would likely decline their offer. As we said goodbye, Robert added something else. Vanessa is trying to contact him. She's calling him, texting him, claims she still loves him, that Morton is a past that she couldn't part with in time. I don't know if it's true or just another manipulation, but I thought you should know. This information alarmed me. I was well aware of how convincing Vanessa could be. She had almost made everyone believe that I was a mean old man trying to ruin the wedding out of jealousy or spite. What if she could convince Elijah to give her a second chance? The next day, I decided to take a chance and visit my son. His apartment was in a modern complex on the outskirts of Van Buren, the 15th floor, panoramic windows overlooking the lake. I'd never been here before, even though Elijah had lived here for 3 years. another sign of how far we drifted apart. I rang the doorbell, expecting him not to answer. But to my surprise, the door opened almost immediately. Elijah looked exhausted. The circles under his eyes, the stubble he usually shaved carefully, his hair disheveled. He was wearing an old t-shirt and sweatpants, not at all the image of a successful financier he usually cultivated. "Dad?" He looked surprised. "What are you doing here?" "Wanted to make sure you were okay," I replied. Elijah hesitated a moment, then stepped back, letting me inside. "Come on in. Sorry about the mess." The apartment was stylish and modern, minimalist furniture, abstract paintings on the walls, a kitchen that looked like an operating room with its sterile cleanliness. But now the perfect order was broken. Empty takeout containers were on the coffee table, cushions and plaid were scattered on the couch, and crumpled papers were lying on the floor. "Do you want coffee?" Elijah asked, heading toward the kitchen. "I'd love some." While he fiddled with the coffee machine, I cautiously sat down on the edge of the couch, pushing some papers aside. Glimpsing them, I saw legal forms with the heading, "Application for Declaration of Nullity of Marriage." "How's the process going?" I asked, nodding at the papers as Elijah returned with 2 cups. He shrugged. "Not as fast as I'd like. Even under these circumstances, there are certain procedures that can't be circumvented." He sat down in the chair across from me. "But my lawyer says there are more than enough grounds. Deception as to the material circumstances, marriage without intent to start a family." He grinned bitterly. "I'll give Vanessa credit for that. She gave me all the cards for a divorce on our wedding day." I sipped my coffee cautiously. "Robert Preston called me. He and Helen wanted to apologize to you." Elijah nodded. "They've contacted me before." "Good people. I can't imagine how they got a daughter like that." "Robert also mentioned that Vanessa is trying to contact you." Elijah's face tensed. "Yes, she's trying. Calls, texts, even came here once. I didn't open it." "What's she saying?" He sighed, set the cup on the table, and rubbed his face with his hands. "That she loves me. That everything that happened was a terrible mistake. That Morton was her past. The one she couldn't completely cut ties with out of fear, but is now ready to do so. That we can start over." I watched his face carefully. You believe her?" Elijah looked up at me tiredly. "I don't know, Dad. Part of me wants to believe, because the alternative means that I was a complete idiot, that I fell in love with a woman who didn't really exist, that everything I felt was based on a lie." "That doesn't make you an idiot," I said softly. "It makes you a person capable of love and trust. Those are qualities to be proud of, even if they sometimes make us vulnerable." Elijah hummed uncertainly, clearly unconvinced by my words. "Anyway, I told her I needed time, that I'm not ready to talk." "That's reasonable," I nodded, feeling somewhat relieved. At least he hadn't thrown himself back into her arms under the influence of the moment. We sat in silence for a few minutes, sipping our coffee. Then Elijah suddenly said, "I'm still mad at you, you know." I didn't pretend to be surprised. "I know. You've suspected about Vanessa for a long time. You could have told me before the wedding, before I proposed to her. I had no proof, only suspicion. You wouldn't have believed it." "Maybe," he stood up and started pacing the room. "But it wasn't just that. You've lied to me my whole life about your financial situation. Let me think you were barely making ends meet, when in fact you were sitting on millions." "I didn't lie directly," I tried to defend myself. "A lie by default is still a lie," he retorted. I couldn't help but admit he was right. "Yeah, you're right. I should have been more honest with you." "Why, Dad?" He stopped in front of me, his eyes demanding an answer. "Why did you hide it? Didn't you trust me? Did you think I'd start demanding money?" "No, that's not it." I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. "Then what is it about?" I realized this was the moment I'd been avoiding for years, a moment of sincerity with my son. It's hard to explain. Part of it is habit. Your mom and I started small, used to save money. Even when things went well, we continued to live modestly, putting the profits back into the business or into investments. Elijah shook his head impatiently. "That doesn't explain why you kept it from me." "I was afraid," I admitted. "Afraid the money would change us, would change you." "Change me?" He looked insulted. You thought I'd become a spoiled rich kid? Not exactly, I tried to find the right words. I've seen how money changes people, and not always for the better. I wanted you to grow up appreciating hard work and effort, not just relying on the family fortune. And that's why you let me fight for scholarships, work part-time in college, take out student loans? I paid for most of your education, I reminded him, but you could have done so much more. His voice rose. You could have saved me the stress, the constant worrying about money. I thought I was doing you a favor, I said quietly, teaching you the value of money. Elijah made a sound that sounded like a laugh and a sob at the same time. The irony is that you taught me about my obsession with money. I chose a career in finance not because of a love of numbers, but because I wanted financial security. I wanted to never again feel like I did when I was a kid, when we were counting every dime. Those words hit me harder than I expected. I never thought of it that way. Of course you didn't, Elijah sat down again, looking not so much angry as tired anymore. Temponano, you were so consumed with your vision of proper parenthood that you didn't notice how it was affecting me. We fell silent again. I could feel the years of misunderstanding and unspoken words lying heavy between us. But maybe now was a chance to at least start to sort it out. After your mom died, I began gently, I became even more withdrawn. She was always the one who made the emotional connection between us. Without her, I didn't know how to be a father. Elijah listened without interrupting. I immersed myself in work, in numbers, in things that were clear and predictable. Money became my way of control when everything else seemed chaotic. And yes, I was wrong to hide the truth about our financial situation from you. It wasn't fair to you. Why did you sell the store? Elijah asked suddenly. You always said it was your and Mom's project. That's exactly why, I replied. After she died, every day there reminded me of her. Everything, every corner was soaked with memories. It was unbearable. Elijah nodded as if understanding. And you got good money for it. Yes, the business was successful. We had a reputation among collectors. Plus, the downtown real estate had gone up in value significantly over the years. And you invested that money. Yes, I've always had a flair for investing. Your mom often joked that I could have worked on Wall Street. I allowed myself a weak smile. Maybe it's a family trait. Elijah didn't smile back. So how much do you have now? I named an amount, a considerable amount, much more than he probably expected. His eyes widened, but he quickly managed his surprise. And what do you plan to do with it all? I've drawn up a will, of course. You're the sole heir, I replied. That's not what I mean. Elijah shook his head. What do you plan to do with that money during your lifetime? Continue living like a hermit in an old house? Saving for everything like the Great Depression is coming tomorrow? His words sounded harsh, but there was a truth in them that I couldn't deny. I don't know, I answered honestly. I've lived a certain way for so long, it's hard to imagine anything different. Maybe it's time to try? There was a note in his voice that I hadn't heard in a long time, something akin to concern, to worrying about me, not just himself. Maybe you're right, I agreed. Elijah finished his coffee and set the cup down. I should get going. I have a meeting with my lawyer in an hour. I stood up, realizing our conversation was coming to an end. Thanks for seeing me. I'm still mad at you, he warned, walking me to the door. I know you are. You have a right to be. But, he paused, I appreciate you coming, and that you were honest today. It wasn't forgiveness, but maybe the beginning of the road to it. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Already at the door, Elijah suddenly asked, what am I supposed to do about Vanessa? She keeps calling, writing, says she's changed, that she's realized her mistakes, that Morton is really in the past now. I looked at my son, seeing the uncertainty in his eyes, the desire to believe against all odds. I can't tell you what to do, Elijah. It's your decision to make. But remember, people rarely change as quickly and dramatically as they want to convince us. He nodded, his face becoming thoughtful. I'll think about it. When I got home, I felt lighter for the first time in a long time. It was as if the heaviness I'd been carrying for years was starting to fall away little by little. Yes, Elijah was still angry with me, and with good reason. Yes, our relationship was far from perfect. But today we'd taken a step toward honesty, toward having a real conversation rather than exchanging platitudes. I sat in my chair, looking at Amelia's picture on the mantelpiece. "You'd be pleased, darling," I whispered. I'd finally started talking to him. Really talk. At that moment, the telephone rang. Robert Preston's number. "Cornelius," his voice sounded worried. "I thought you should know. Vanessa, she went to see Elijah. She was very upset, saying something about proving her love. I'm worried that she might do something rash." I felt a chill run down my back. "Thank you, Robert. I'll contact Elijah immediately." Hanging up the phone, I immediately dialed my son's number. There was no answer. I sent a text. "Vanessa is on her way to see you. Be careful. Call me back." Then I sat down and waited, hoping my fears were in vain, but preparing for the worst. No matter what happened next, I was determined to support my son, not as a controlling figure from his childhood, but as a father who was finally ready to be honest, open, and present in his life. It had been a month since the day I alerted Elijah to Vanessa's visit. It turned out that my fears were not in vain. She did indeed show up at his door in a state of extreme emotional agitation. According to Elijah, she went from tears and pleading to anger and threats, claiming that their marriage was fated and that I had ruined it with my interference. Fortunately, my son did not succumb to her manipulations. Moreover, this scene seemed to have finally convinced him of the rightness of the breakup. The next day he called me, briefly told me what had happened, and thanked me for the warning. Our relationship remained strained, but something began to change. We called every few days. The conversations were short, mostly about practical things, how the annulment process was going, whether Vanessa was bothering him again. But the very fact of this regular communication was already progress. The legal formalities were dragging on, despite the obvious evidence of cheating. Vanessa suddenly decided to contest the annulment, demanding a division of property, arguing that although the marriage had been short-lived, she was entitled to compensation for moral damages and ruined career prospects. Elijah was beyond furious, but his lawyer assured him that this tactic would only prolong the process, but not change the outcome. And then, at the end of that month, I got a text from Elijah. "Dad, we need to have a serious talk. Come to Blue Pine tomorrow at 2 o'clock. The Blue Pine was a small family restaurant on the outskirts of town where we had gone sometimes when Elijah was a teenager. I hadn't been there in about 15 years and didn't even know the restaurant was still in business. The next day I arrived 15 minutes early, feeling strangely excited, like I was about to take an important exam. The restaurant hadn't changed much. The same wooden tables, checkered tablecloths, hunting trophies on the walls. The menu, perhaps, had become more refined, but the general atmosphere of a cozy provincial tavern remained. I chose a table in the far corner, overlooking the lake, and ordered coffee, waiting for my son. Elijah showed up at two sharp-dressed casual jeans and a simple sweater, not the business suit I was used to seeing him in. He looked rested, calm, like he'd taken a heavy weight off his shoulders. "Dad," he nodded at me and sat down across from me. "Elijah, you look good." "Feeling better?" He ordered tea for the waiter, finally starting to sleep properly. "Good news from the lawyer?" "Yes." Vanessa withdrew her petition for property division, agreed to a quick and quiet annulment. "Really?" I was surprised. "Sanom, what changed?" Elijah smiled slightly. "Morton." "Morton?" "Yeah. He contacted me last week, said Vanessa was trying to get back with him too, claiming I was a mistake for her and that he was the only one she'd ever loved." Elijah shook his head. "Unbelievable, isn't it? She tried to play on two fronts even after everything that happened." "And what about Morton?" "He turned her down, and so did I. But he also agreed to testify about the nature of our relationship if the case went to trial. That seems to have convinced Vanessa to back down. Her lawyer contacted mine yesterday, offering a settlement." I nodded, feeling relieved for my son. "That's good. You deserve a fresh start." Elijah looked out the window thoughtfully. "You know, now that this whole nightmare is almost behind me, I feel strangely grateful." "Gratitude?" "Yes. If it hadn't been for your intervention, if it hadn't been for Morton, I would have married a woman who never really loved me. Maybe would have lived with her for years in a marriage built on lies." He turned to me. "I know I was unfair to you after we married, blamed you for ruining my happiness. But the truth is, I never had real happiness with Vanessa. It was an illusion. You couldn't have known, I said softly, but you should have sensed it. There were signs, he sighed. Her persistent interest in your finances, for example. Questions about your inheritance, about how you handled the money from the sale of the store. I'd written it off as mere curiosity, but now I realized she was studying potential prey. The waiter brought our drinks, and we were silent for a while. When he left, I asked, "Why did you choose this place to meet?" Elijah looked around the restaurant. "Remember when we came here when I turned 16? That was the first time you let me try a beer." I smiled at the memory. One glass, and that of a light one. Mom would have been horrified if she'd found out. Oh, she knew. Amelia always knew everything about us. The remark brought a smile to both of us, a rare moment of shared warmth. "I asked you to come over to talk about something else," Elijah said, getting serious. "About money." I tensed. "What about money exactly?" "About why you've kept the truth about your condition from me all these years. And don't talk yourself out of it with generalities about wanting to teach me the value of labor. I want the real reason." I looked out the window, gathering my thoughts. Beyond the glass, I could see the lake, gray and calm on a cloudy day. How often I'd looked at a lake like that in the park near my house, reflecting on the past, on the decisions that had led me to loneliness. "When I was young," I began, "my father went broke. He was a successful entrepreneur. We had a big house, cars, vacations abroad, and then he made some bad investments and lost everything. Literally everything. We had to sell the house, move into a tiny apartment. My mom went to work as a secretary, and my dad, he never recovered. He started drinking, became violent, bitter, died of cirrhosis of the liver when I was 20. Elijah listened intently, not interrupting. "When Amelia and I started our business, I swore to myself that I would never repeat his mistakes, that I would be careful with money, build up reserves, insurance against any surprises. It became almost a mania. Even when things went well, I continued to live my life as if ruin could happen at any moment." "Did Mom know about this?" "Of course. She understood my fears but tried to allay them. Wanted us to enjoy life more, to spend money on experiences, on traveling. Money is a means to life, not an end," she often said. "And yet you kept the truth from me." "Yes," I admitted. "At first it was just an extension of my general approach to finances. Caution, modesty, not drawing attention to my wealth. But then," I stammered, choosing my words, "then, as you became an adult, I began to fear something else." "Of what exactly?" I looked my son straight in the eye. "That people would be with you not because of yourself, but because of money. I've seen it happen to the children of rich parents, how they could never be sure they were loved for themselves, not for access to their wealth." Elijah hesitated. "And so you let me think you were a poor hermit." "Not poor, but yes, I created an image of a man living a modest, no-frills life. But as a result, you made me vulnerable to the likes of Vanessa," Elijah said bitterly. "She found out the truth about your fortune and saw me as the way to that money, while I didn't even know it existed." The thought had never crossed my mind, and I felt a prick of guilt. "You're right, I didn't think about it. I'm sorry." Elijah sipped his tea. "After Mom died, you became even more withdrawn. Was that money related too?" I shook my head. "No, it was grief. Amelia was the heart of our family. She knew how to talk about feelings, how to create an emotional connection. I was always more reserved, rational. When she died, I didn't just lose my wife. I lost my emotional compass." "You could learn," Elijah said quietly. "For my sake. I lost my mother too." "I know." I nodded, feeling my throat constrict. "I let you down. Instead of growing closer in our shared grief, I've distanced myself, immersed myself in work, in practical concerns, because I didn't know how to deal with my emotions, how to talk about them." "Like Dad," Elijah remarked, referring to my father. "Yeah," I admitted with a heavy heart. "Like my dad. I was so afraid of repeating his financial mistakes that I didn't notice I was repeating his emotional ones." We both fell silent, realizing the bitter irony of the situation. Then Elijah asked, "What are you going to do now? With the money? With the house? With your life?" This question caught me off guard. I'd been living a day-to-day, routine life for so long that I'd given little thought to the future. I don't know, I answered honestly. Oh, what would your advice be? Elijah raised his eyebrows, surprised that I was asking his opinion. My advice would be to start living, really live, not just exist. Travel, meet people, try new things, maybe do some charity work if you want to leave something behind besides money. That's what your mother would want, I remarked. Yeah, that sounds like Mom. Elijah nodded with a slight smile. She always said that life should be lived with a full cup. I imagined Amelia looking at me now, shaking her head with loving reproach. You're right. It's time for a change. You could move out, Elijah suggested. Your house is full of memories, but it's also become your prison. Where to? Elijah shrugged. Wherever you want to go. To an apartment downtown closer to theaters and galleries, or to a little house by the lake, or to another city or country altogether. What about you? I asked, surprising myself. I would never have asked such a question before, showing my dependence on him. Yeah? Elijah looked surprised. I have my own life, Dad. My own apartment, my own job. You don't need to stay in Van Buren for me. I know, but I stammered, not knowing how to express my thought. I wish we could see each other more often, get to know each other all over again. The expression on Elijah's face softened. I'd like that too, but it doesn't depend on geography. We could live in the same house and be strangers, or we could be on different continents and keep in touch. I've never been good at keeping in touch at a distance, I admitted. It can be learned, Elijah said, like expressing emotions. So can spending money on the joys of life. It's never too late to start something new. There was a wisdom in his words that I hadn't expected. Maybe I had underestimated my son all these years, seeing him as a child in need of guidance rather than an adult with his own view of the world. I'll think about it, I promised. Good, Elijah nodded. And Dad, about Vanessa. Yeah? You were right about her. Right from the beginning. I should have listened. You couldn't have known, I repeated. Love often blinds you, and that's normal. Maybe, Elijah finished his tea, but I'm still grateful that you tried to protect me, even if your methods were unideal. It was the closest thing to forgiveness I could expect right now, and I accepted it gratefully. I learned a lot from that story too, I said. Like what? Like the fact that sometimes you need to trust people instead of trying to control everything. That honesty is the best defense against manipulation. That family ties are more important than financial security. Elijah nodded. Not bad lessons. We ordered lunch, the simple but delicious food for which this restaurant was famous. The conversation turned to more neutral topics. Elijah's job, the latest news in town, a book I'd recently read. It wasn't the deep emotional connection Amelia would have dreamed of, but it was an honest, calm conversation between two adults trying to bond after years of misunderstanding. As we said our goodbyes in the parking lot, Elijah unexpectedly hugged me briefly, almost formally, but it was the first physical contact between us in years. Don't disappear, Dad, he said. I won't disappear, I promised. On the drive home, I reflected on our conversation, on Elijah's suggestions, on the life I'd led for the past 15 years. My house greeted me with its familiar silence, but for the first time in a long time, it seemed oppressive rather than cozy. I walked over to Amelia's picture on the mantelpiece. You'd be pleased with today, dear, I said aloud. Elijah and I were finally starting to talk for real. I couldn't sleep for a long time that night, thoughts swirling in my head, plans forming and scattering. In the morning, I got up with a clear decision. This was the day I would start a new chapter of my life. The first thing I did was call the realtor and set up an appointment. It was time to sell the house that had become my refuge and my prison. Then I contacted a travel agent. After so many years of saving money, I would finally allow myself the trip Amelia and I had always dreamed of. Italy, Greece, maybe even Japan. Places where history and beauty intertwine to create new experiences. I also decided to meet with my financial advisor to discuss philanthropic opportunities. Elijah was right. It's time to use that money for something more than just saving. And perhaps the most important decision of all, I will see my son more often, not to impose but not to disappear, to be as present in his life as he will allow. Looking out the window at my old garden, I felt a strange mix of emotions, sadness at parting with the past, anxiety at the unknown future, but also relief, almost joy, that I was finally free of the shackles I had put on myself. Vanessa, with all her calculation and manipulation, had inadvertently given me a chance for a new beginning. A chance to right the wrongs of the past and build something new, not perfect, but perhaps more real than anything I'd had in recent years. Thank you, Amelia, I whispered, looking at the delicate roses in the garden, her favorite flowers. You always knew what we both needed,